Sahana Vavatu, Sahanao Bunaktu, Sahaviryang Karavavahe, Tejasvina Vadhitamastu, Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Last two verses that we were speaking about, 40 and 41, we're saying about where is that gateway where all the data flows through, and that gateway is your senses. Where you expose your body to or your senses to, the eyes and the ears, on a consistent basis is the kind of person that you become, right? Relative person. So then the question is, what kind of a person am I? Right? And the answer is, well, the kind of a person that you expose your senses to. To what? Well, to certain audios, videos, books, knowledges, all of that ends up making the person that we are. And then the question was asked, then what happens then if my senses are exposed to, suppose, an environment that's not healthy, or that's maybe debilitating, or it's pulls me down, or it's discouraging. It could happen anywhere. It could happen at work, at family, work, wherever it is. And I cannot get out of it, right? And so then we said the next solution is to use the mind and to ask ourselves, what options do I have in this situation? And the first easy path that we all take, because this is part of evolution, we always take the path of least resistance. It's either like this or it's like that. So we always find these two binaries and we go for one or the other because it's easy. And then we want to move on with life. But then Krishna says in verse 40 and 41 that instead of choosing binaries, rather ask, what are my in-between options? And I want to give us some example of this. What does it mean in different situations to choose an in-between option rather than black or white? So suppose you have there's inside a marital conflict. See, sometimes two partners, they get together, and they get together on the basis of a role that they play. Now, what I see sometimes is by the time they reach retirement, and one of them starts to have an awakening, because all this time I've been playing the role as a spouse of working, 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 and I never thought about my own life. What do I want? What matters? Where do I want to go? What really is it that I value in this life? It doesn't come at all. So the moment they finish work, they retire. One of them wakes up, and it just naturally, the Vanaprastha stage starts to awaken. And you go, wow, all this time I've been just a submissive wife, a caring husband. But what about me? And then the anger starts to bottle up. Yeah. And then the anger has nowhere place to go. Now the other is on the receiving end. So the other starts to receive a little bit of, some strange comments, strange behaviors, and they don't understand what's going on with this other person. I'm starting to lose him. I'm starting to lose her. The one person that I depended upon for decades. And what happens is one of them on the receiving end is not able to, is losing control. So to regain control, what do I have to do? I have to kind of bring you back to the box that I know you for decades. Now, the one that's awakening, to them, that's called suppression. Like, you're suppressing me. You're not letting me grow. And it gets to such a point where one feels stuck. I don't know what to do, right? I'm discovering all this music and these, amazing Instagram and Facebook and communication, and all this time I was depending on one man, one woman in my life. And now there's this whole world opened up to me. And so they start to think of a way out. What do I do? Either I stay like a submissive wife or a good husband and just take the heat, right? Take this new conflict. Or I leave and let this whole drama end. This is how we go, binaries. But what could be an in-between option? So it's not these two extremes. One is unhealthy, stay, don't say anything, take it, be eaten from the inside out. The other is leave it all, file a divorce or don't file a divorce, just move out and solve the problem right then and there. What could be a potential in between?
Stay and work it out.
Yeah, basically, I would express my views about what's happening within me, the changes that are going on, or the ideas that I have. And if it's not accepted well, then maybe we have to look at a compromise or something. I wouldn't seek ending like the other relationship. I wouldn't seek ending a relationship. You know, especially retirement is like over 40 years of relationship.
I would suggest take a break, go away for some time, review your relationships, discuss with your friends, relatives, and then review the decision after 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, whatever is suitable short. Rather than take a decision on the spot and spoil a long-standing relationship.
You agree that you disagree on certain points, and then you agree that you agree on certain points. You have to upfront speak it up, I think, with the partner. And so you know the problem areas versus the agreeing areas. So if it's laid out, usually that's never laid out. It's all hidden within our emotions.
Yeah.
We don't speak it out to the partner to say, I do not agree with A, B, C, D, but I agree with, G, H, I, J or something like that.
Okay.
You really have to come out with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how effective this would be. And of course, it all depends on, as you're suggesting, the level of communication and acceptance that people are listening and hearing one another. But a possibility might be for the person that's kind of changing and waking up to ask the other person for a compromise and say, hey, like, and this is just an example, let's for a week, let me do what I want to do. And then we'll do a week with what you want to do. And then we'll come back together and we'll have a discussion. Like, is my doing what I want to do necessarily impacting you to the point that I shouldn't be allowed to do it?
Workplace ethic. So you're working in a job that is meaningful to you, and you discover something fishy is going on, some illegal practices are going on in the department that you work in. Now, again, two options, right? One of them is I report, but I risk my career, right? If I get exposed that it was me. Or collusion. Collusion is basically not saying anything. What could be an in-between option? Because if you don't report it, then you have to bear this illegal practice, so you are as guilty as the perpetrator.
I've had this happen many times at my work. I try to engage with the person that has done whatever it is wrong, and ask them if they're aware of it, if they're aware that if they're aware that they've actually done something wrong. So I give them a chance to try to redeem themselves and be honest. And if that seems to be obvious that they're aware, then I'll have a discreet conversation with my manager and explain to him what I feel is going wrong with this person, and for him to try and engage with them, but in a non-confrontational way. You always get a better result that way. And then it escalates from there if they're purposely just not caring.
Okay.
But if they honestly don't know, then you give them a chance to improve.
Okay.
So you never sort of write them off. You just see where they're at. And then if they're unaware that they're completely, bypassing all the rules or the expectations, then they're going to learn from it. So in that way, they'll improve themselves. So you sort of, instead of just putting labels on people, you try to approach it in that way, and then they can improve and everyone wins.
Okay, what about if it's an important figure, like a manager themselves, is doing something illegal or phishing, and you need them for, right, your paycheck, right? It's a genuine concern. What then? Well, perhaps it's very interesting. You don't have to report it and show your face. You can send an anonymous email to the right person and say, I'm not comfortable sharing who this person is, who I am, but here's the proof, here's the evidence, and do with it as you wish. That way, you have done whatever you could, and you have preserved your reputation in your job. It's an option. And then we have parent-teen conflict. So your children who you care for, they engage in alcohol. This is a very good possibility. And again, two options. One of them is to punish them and to remove their privileges, option one, or option two is to ignore the whole situation and just secretly hope, oh, it's not going to last a long time. Two options. What could be a third option? Again, you think and you say, well, maybe I could show them a talk, a documentary or whatever. I can just engage in a conversation, showing the consequences, career burnout. So two options. One of them is I stay in work and I burn myself out and I just take the heat, right? And I have the money. On the other hand is, complain, right? Complain that you're not making enough money. So what do? Right? Two options. Again, you can go to the department and say, where is my role more compatible with? In what section of this place am I more, would I be more likely useful? Or where do my values align more often? So again, there's always that in-between option. And there's also friendship boundary. Suppose two friends, and slowly through the time, one of your friends starts to have some emotional, they emotionally hurt you, right? They say something that's not pleasant to your ears. Option one, harshly reprimand them and then risk rupture of the relationship. Or again, withdraw silently, right? And then they'll obviously say, why are you withdrawing? And you just say, no, I'm just busy. What do? What's the in-between option? Again, I can confront him and I can say that this is not pleasant, without accusing. So the point is, there is always an in-between option. And what Krishna wants to portray here is that rather than resorting to this easy way, take a little bit of time and think about the alternatives. And the good news is there's always an alternative. The next section is verse 42. Where are these three places of mastery where you get to regain control of your life? Indriyani paranyahuhu. Indriyebhya param manaha. Manas astu para buddhihi. Yo buddhe paratastu saha.
They say that the sense organs are superior to the body. The mind is superior to the sense organs. The intellect is superior to the mind, whereas the one who is superior to the intellect is he, the Atman.
So you can look at this verse in two ways. A practical sense as to life management, first senses, then the mind, then the intellect, or recognizing what is the most superior here. So if you, for example, stay at the level of the intellect, then what's more superior than the intellect? The self. So this means you can entertain all your life, sharpening up your intellect, but still there is something more superior than the intellect, which is the self. So let me first cover the first standpoint, and that is the sense organs, he says, are superior to the body. Okay. So according to Vedanta, the only reason why you have a physical body is not to eat, even though it's necessary, not to procreate, even though that's also possible, not to have fun, even though that's also possible, not to get education, even though that's also possible. Ultimately, it is to understand your truth. As long as it is in the name of this highest purpose, which is to recognize your truth, then you have lived a useful life. This is according to Vedanta. Otherwise, if one has a perfectly healthy body, it's very ironic, isn't it? Perfectly healthy body, successful, and you have not used that body for the highest purpose, then in this case, Bhaja Govindam would say, Adi Shankara, very blunt and direct, you have utterly wasted your time feeding this body made of flesh, bone, which will turn to ash, fine ash one day. Then it says here, the senses are superior to that body. So again, you can look at this in two ways. The body is here, sitting in this chair, but the senses can reach very far out. Now you say, okay, that's really nice information, but what do I do with it? And that's exactly why there's a second approach to this, a second interpretation, and that is, what is superior to the body? The senses. Okay. So this means that if I want to take my body to the purpose of the highest, to that which matters, to what is to be done, then where is the locus of control? It's not in the body, it's in the senses. Because as we said earlier, wherever the senses are exposed to whatever, most of the time, that is going to influence where this vehicle gets moved, to what places, and where, and for how long. Thereby, then it says, now the mind is superior to the sense organs. Okay, so why is this? Because the sense organs have no capacity to close. You can consciously close them, but even if you close them, they have to be opened eventually, the eyes and the ears. So this means sense organs cannot selectively choose to noise cancel noisy neighbors, even though that would be really, really cool. Or not to see a colleague that you may not, that triggers you or something, right? Even though that could also be helpful to get triggered and then to reflect, why am I being triggered by this colleague? So it's never really the external environment. It's always something it's unresolved within the mind and it gets triggered. So now the mind is what takes all the sense data and it conglomerates it into one holistic region. And then it makes sense of what it's perceiving. And then it attaches likes, dislikes, doubts. It can say then, should I pursue this? Should I not pursue this? So in that sense, the mind goes through this vacillation period. Sankalpa, vikalpa, right? I should not. I should not. I should not. And sometimes that period can last a very long time, doesn't it? And who enjoys that period? When your mind is just endlessly going from left to right, left to right, left to right. Nobody enjoys that. So it's telling you something. Look, it's amazing, isn't it? So if I don't enjoy it, that means there's an inbuilt system telling me, I have to then come out of this place. And that place is thus the buddhi, the intellect, which is why the intellect is superior to the mind. But before I get to the intellect, so as we said, the mind is what vacillates and what gives you that attraction for things and repulsion, which is lovely. If you didn't have attraction or repulsion for things, would that be a fun life? That would be like a robot. Nobody would date. Your parents would have never formed an attraction for each other. Nothing would ever happen. So again, Krishna is not saying it is bad. He's just saying it is useful. But remember, there is something more superior than staying in the world of emotions. In a way, you can say that teenagers like the world of the senses, right? That's the stage, right? The younger stage, the world of the senses. But then as we grow up, now we want company, we want unity. And then we say, well, now, I stand for emotions. Now, the thing here is that while emotions are healthy, Krishna says, well, even more superior is that which is stable to emotions. Because as I said, nobody likes to stay in an unstable state. And that stability is the intellect. Because the mind is emotional, chaotic, doubtful. Now, what's really interesting is if your mind goes from left to right, number one, you just said nobody wants to be there for too long. But did you say in that statement, I don't want that at all? Left to right? You didn't. Because if you didn't have left to right, how would you decide in the first place? So there has to be first an option available to you in the mind, which can then vacillate left to right, to which then I apply my buddhi and say, what are the pros of left? What are the pros and the cons of right? And then I can make a fair assessment. And thereby the intellect is something that can guide the emotions. It can take the emotions out of this darkness, out of a state of despair or overwhelm. Emotions can't do that, but you need something superior to emotions to take emotions to a higher place. Thereby, we say the intellect can take you to a path of what is right, what is to be done. Whereas the emotions, they just do whatever feels good. So you still need a guidance system. And that guidance system we call Shreyaha. What is the right thing to do? What will be the consequences of this? And what is useful here for both of us? See, this whole thing about do this or that, this language needs to go, because that's what got Arjuna into trouble. Do I fight or not? Is that what Krishna has been teaching Arjuna? Go fight, don't fight. No. Krishna changes the entire conversations from I should to I shouldn't into what needs to be done. Do you hear the difference? No more do, don't do. Just what needs to be done for the sake of harmony. That's it. The whole conversation changes when the intellect starts to take over. Whereas Arjuna's mind, where was Arjuna's mind? In the emotions. And as long as it's in emotions, it's about should I or should I not? I like her, I don't like her. Just very kind of surface level. The moment you bring the intellect, you say, what's really useful? What do I value? Does this match my higher values? What's the consequences? What's the pros? What's the cons? So a little bit of that, and then you have a much more stable life. However, Krishna then says, even more superior than the intellect is Saha, which is he. He means Atman. Why? Because even the intellect is subject to contamination, is subject to ignorance, has confirmation bias, is subject to hundreds of biases, actually, makes errors, forgets, mixes up information, becomes non-alert. So Krishna here says that, fine, intellect is relatively the highest place that you can achieve as a human being, relatively, right? He says it is superior than everything, the body, the mind, the emotions, the doubting, wonderful. But remember this, you are much bigger than the body, the senses, the mind, the intellect. No matter how superior the intellect is to the prior, what's even more superior than that? Which is awareness. Therefore, now you say, what do I do with this information, right? I know that awareness is superior. Well, you can come to recognize that no matter what you do to the intellect, no matter how smart it gets, what is always going to be superior? The self. And thereby, this puts things in perspective. Because look at this, just to put this in context. Suppose we don't have this verse, and then you say, stay at the mind, right? Oh, emotions are the ultimate. They're the superior of life. Then what happens? Now emotions become the goal of life. Now they become the driving force of all decisions. They become the topic of conversations at the dinner table. They become everything. But Krishna says, don't forget, there's something higher than your emotions. Intellect. It's really interesting if you look at the commercial world of entertainment and hobbies. Take soccer, for example. It's like the embodiment of all human emotions you can imagine. Anger, fear, love, lust, beauty. Every spectrum of emotions is in soccer. Now take any other sport that you like. For the most part, sports tends to evoke a lot of strong emotions. You're not thinking, oh, look, so there's the ball. What trajectory is the ball going? Okay, so what's the wind speed? Now, I wonder, based on the wind speed, what's the velocity of the ball falling down? And what will be the strength of the football player's muscle strength in contrast to the ball and the inflation of the ball's air pressure? And when that's a contact, I wonder how fast it will go inside the goalkeeper's, past the goalkeeper's eyesight, depending on whether they had coffee or not. Not one person is going to think like that. You're just going to watch and enjoy the game. Therefore, Krishna says, enjoy the game, but remember there is something even more superior in reference to moksha, and that is the intellect. Intellect is going to pull you out of the world of the fascinating and the fun and the drama and the romance. And when it does, then remember, don't get stuck in intellect, because there's something even far superior, and thus the intellect becomes the vehicle to that which is the most superior. What's the only true way to conquer all desires? And that is by knowing your true nature. Evam buddhe param buddva samstabhyatmanam atmana jahi shatrum mahabaho kamarupam durasadam.
Arjuna, the mighty armed, knowing that which is superior to the intellect in this way, having made the mind steady with the buddhi, destroy the enemy that is in the form of binding desire, that which is so difficult to understand.
Will your intellect, knowing that intellect is relatively the most superior, not absolutely, but relatively, will that intellect ever master life completely? Will it ever get rid of all binding desires completely? You see, in the relative world, you can never say something will be done absolutely. Absolute only belongs to the realm of the self. So knowing that my intellect, which is the most superior relatively, will never absolutely be mastered, nor will it absolutely be pure, nor will it absolutely be sharp, then how do you know when it's ready to ascertain that which is most superior? You just know. It's not like there's a barometer. It's not like some voice from the sky says, now you're ready. You just know. You just feel comfortable with the knowledge. You start to relate with the final knowledge. So what it's saying essentially is reducing these binding desires enough so that you become ready and thus own up to that which illumines the intellect. So the intellect gets used to recognize its own truth. In other words, the buddhi can now recognize, it is not me, the intellect, that is the one who is shining the world. It is something behind, I'll put that in quotes, behind me, which is illumining my own activity, says the buddhi. And that which is illumining my own activity, that is the true self. And thereby, one comes to own up, we call it the light that illumines that superior buddhi, the light that illumines the activity of the buddhi. I'll give you an example. Okay, let's do it like this. What's 2 plus 2, please? Plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 divided by 2. What's illumining the activity of that buddhi calculating those numbers? What's the awareness in the presence of whom that calculation is taking place? That is, which is saha, most superior, the light that illumines the activity of the buddhi, the thinker, the feeler, the doer, the enjoyer. Thereby, eventually one comes to be totally lucid about the light that illumines the buddhi's activities, that is called permanent knowledge has taken place, moksha. And that moksha is what is the true solution to conquering all desires. What is the biggest desire of all for everyone? To exist.
Fullness.
Yeah, fullness, but as an individual, right? To exist. How? As an individual. So nobody wants to go out of existence. So what is your ultimate, in reference to you, the whole being, limitless being? What's the biggest thief, the biggest criminal? The desire which Krishna stated, right? Which makes you the entire limitless being come back as one limited individual carrying this body. So moksha is that desire which destroys all other desires, including the main desire to come back as a desiring individual. Therefore, verse 43 essentially says, Arjuna, take up your duty, clean up your mind, reduce these binding desires, and you will be fit for the dawn of self-knowledge. Om Tat Sat iti Shrimad Bhagavad Gita Tsu Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Karma Yogo Nama Tritiyo Dhyayaha.
Om Brahman is the only reality. Thus ends the third chapter called Karma Yoga, having the topic of karma in the Bhagavad Gita, which is in the form of a dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, which is the essence of the Upanishads, whose subject matter is both the knowledge of Brahman and yoga.
In the verse there, 43, where it says, having made the mind steady, is that referring to the achievement of samadhi as a prerequisite, the wisdom?
It's specifically referring to, as I said, making the mind polished, undoing the stories, which are interpreting the verses in the light of their own likes and dislikes, which are basically messing up the knowledge according to one's fancies and biases. So these things have to be cleared up. For example, you tell, someone about a story, right? And then they tell that story to somebody else. Now, already that story is not your story, right? It's already somebody else's, it's already their story. So, but you'd say that story to someone with a pure mind who's very objective and simply just reports what they heard. How would they say the story? Well, they'll say much more pure according to what you said. So in that same way, it depends on what mind hears this knowledge. That's the kind of mind that will interpret this. So what we have to first do is clean up the mind so that it can, understand as is intended. When you say samadhi, are you talking about nirvikalpa or savikalpa samadhi, or just...
Yeah, sorry, I'm using a Buddhist term there. Yeah, sorry. Just the establishment of concentration. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So concentrate. If samadhi is one pointedness, right?
Yeah.
The general focused mind able to stick with the verses and not fly left and right and start to bring up all sorts of unrelated phenomena, but just stay with it for a while. Then in that case, samadhi, you could say, is a requirement for self-knowledge.
Yeah, that's probably not quite what I would mean by it, because that to me seems still on the intellect level. In other words, you're keeping your intellect steady. I would think that samadhi is more, it transcends that, and it allows an insight into non-duality, which is not available to the intellect.
Good. So samadhi, the point is still at the level of the intellect, because if we take the model of the koshas, then we will say that the highest level in reference to a human being that makes up the composure of the human being is the intellect, which is or can attain extremely subtle or sublime levels of a subtlety, which call it very sattvic mind, very pure sattvic mind. So any kind of samadhi in Advaita Vedanta will always be in reference to the intellect.
So it's still dualistic.
Still dualistic, yeah, because you cannot attribute any kind of state or an on-off switch or intensity to the self. The self is beyond intensity, beyond any kind of a fluctuation or any kind of manifest and unmanifest, because samadhi, no samadhi, now samadhi, right? So it's an on-off switch, but self has no on-off. Yeah, so in the presence of the self, there is no samadhi. In the presence of self, now there is samadhi. So samadhi is an instrumental activity of the intellect.
So here we're getting like a description of the levels. We're not really getting a methodology as such. We're just getting a description of what's...
We are getting a description of samadhi and where is its localization, where is it located. The methodology is not shared in this verse.
Yeah, sure.
But we are, in a sense, saying that what is superior in terms of discovering the highest, right? You cannot discover the self if you're at the level of the senses. Because if you're at the level of the senses, what will you try to do? I will try to see the self, hear the self, taste the self, smell the self. I will try to go up to a wise person and see they smell like rosemary or a rose. Oh, you smell like a rose, therefore now you are really wise. I tell you, this actually happens because the person is still at the level of the senses. So now that Krishna comes and says, hey, wait, hey, there's something more superior. Get your emotions in order, get your emotional intelligence in order, because most of the obstacles that one has a resistance to Vedanta is at the level of the emotions, I tell you. Even one who walks, who is relatively emotionally composed, and they walk into Vedanta, there's a possibility of them saying, Vedanta sounds too intellectual. Why? It's not intellectual. But they're saying it sounds intellectual. Why? Because emotions, to take a sudden quantum shift into prakriyas, into these logics, it sounds intellectual.
Even if samadhi, for the devil's advocate, is the one that you feel is, making you into the Advaita situation, even for a minute, if we think that way. But then, again, coming out of it, you come back with agyan. So it has really changed nothing. So in the everyday's life, you still remain the same, unless you again, happen to go into the samadhi for those 10, 15, 20 minutes. So even if you feel that there it is everything, the blissful thing that you are looking at, that nectar is there, you're coming back in the everyday life and it has changed nothing.
When you're driving, you're concentrated, aren't you? That's samadhi. That's why I used the word initially with Mike. Samadhi can also mean basic concentration where the world fades out. You and I are having a conversation and everything fades out. You are in a mini samadhi. We go through this all the time in life. So there's nothing mystical about this. And like anything, you can have levels of samadhi.
Yeah, levels. And also, it's why the Buddhists talk about samma samadhi, which is right samadhi. So there are all sorts of samadhis where the sniper is aiming at the woman in the street. I mean, that, it's concentrated, it's samadhi, but it's not right samadhi. It's not so good.
And then we have sahaja. Sahaja samadhi is actually moksha. So that is called constant samadhi. Now, the problem with this is when a mind that's still at the level of the senses, when they hear sahaja samadhi, what will instantly happen? They will think the wise person is in some kind of a mental state. You see? So we have to redefine sahaja samadhi. Even nirvikalpa samadhi, they're the same things in Advaita Vedanta. It just means that it is an unbroken recognition of my true nature, which is awareness. Unbroken. There's no on and off. Now I knew in class, now I don't. Now I know when I listen to Swami, now I don't. It's an unbroken recognition. But if you take Nirvikalpa Samadhi in the world of yoga, Patanjali Sutra, then they will say that's the highest, one of the highest things to accomplish, which is a state, a mental state at the level of the intellect. Therefore, that's why it's useful to know the Shat Darshana, the 6 schools of Indian philosophy, because then without it, sometimes these terms can be washed onto Advaita and it all becomes a big mess. Yeah, so
Isn't it, Andre, with the yoga school, I'm just trying to remember from Brahma Sutras, they believe in Ishvara, the yoga school, plus Pradhana and Purusha. And they think there's 3 entities, so automatically that's Dvaita. And their ideal is to try to connect, because they see Ishvara connecting Pradhana and Purusha, and they try to go into a state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi to somehow get a pure state of Purusha or something. But it's still Dvaita, because they see the three entities, and automatically that limits Ishvara, that limits the Purusha, that limits Ishvara, and they see Purusha as individuals.
There's Prakriti and there's Purusha. And there are, obviously now two realities. And what the aim in yoga is to attain Purusha. But as long as you speak like that, I have attained consciousness, you're still speaking as it's an object. I've attained an object, right? But you have to what about this table? What about your phone and the screen that you have to also resolve everything else into that one reality. Until that resolution until it happens, then what kind of moksha it is, I don't know, but one is still in a dualistic state of existence. Yeah, so essentially you have to resolve everything because everything is already here right now. Even to imagine consciousness, that's only happening in one single mind, isn't it? So it has no bearing on consciousness. It's just an imagination. So we have to look at the things as they are and simply understand what is true right now. That is Advaita Vedanta. Not manipulating realities or kind of changing, just seeing things as they are right here, right now, in this moment. That is Advaita Vedanta. It's always been about now. And you always find one principle that is here and now. I am, right? What's no longer here that was there 5 minutes ago? Well, a conversation that happened 5 minutes ago is no longer here. But what is 5 minutes ago and what is right now? I am the presence in whom this entire conversation, this inquiry is occurring right now. The light in the presence of whom this conversation is going on. This experience is going on. So the experience depends on the light of consciousness. So if there's one thing that you cannot negate, is the light of consciousness. As long as there's a subject and object, there's still two. So you have to use your cognitive intellect and recognize that what pervades both the subject and what pervades both the object is the intelligence. And the truth of that intelligence is one consciousness, which is always known to you and I as that non-negatable amness. Nobody here can negate that. You can negate everything else. You can have amnesia right now. Forget about every word that's ever been said, including your name, all language lost. But in that state of amnesia and dementia, you will still know I am. You will still know that you exist and that you're aware. You may not be able to say it out loud because language is gone, but it's still a known fact. So that known fact cannot be negated because that is the truth of all things.
What is there that I should feel motivated to go into Samadhi for? What is there for me?
Exactly. So this question of if you want to use Nirvikalpa Samadhi as a non-Advaitic term, that means it's a state to enter, then there is a purpose. And that's what Mike was saying. There is a purpose to come back and have your life transformed. It really does transform one's life. When knowledge takes place, when a Vedanta comes into one's life, then what's the purpose? There's essentially no purpose at all. You can enter whatever state you want, the most beautiful, sublime states. What is always going to be the knowledge of a jnani? That state was coming and going. It was coming and going, right? It was just another mithya. What's the purpose of this? Simply to recognize that whatever experience is ever attained, it's always pervaded by the one reality, which is known to you right now in this ordinary, waking, mundane state, as I am. Therefore, right, it removes the need from attainments of 100 million states.
To me, if you're in samadhi and sort of having a glimpse of a non-dual reality, it's not, I mean, it kind of is the mind in a sense that's realizing that, but I would say that it's consciousness itself realizing itself. And I would also say that the word knowledge is a noun, but it's actually an experience. To know is to experience, and I'm not sure that we can reify knowing into a noun, knowledge,
Okay.
which is also consciousness, you know, ultimately.
Consciousness always knows consciousness as consciousness. It cannot know itself as anything other than what it is. Okay.
But we don't know it as knowing itself. Is that right?
It is effortlessly known to you as evident, self-evident self. So it cannot be known as something like an object. It's just, it's self-known, self-revealing. So you don't have to discuss it. You don't have to talk about it. You just have to clean up the mind and own up that I don't have to do anything to be aware. I am effortlessly aware. You relate to this?
Yeah.
Effortlessly aware. You see this? So that means I don't have any part in knowing that I'm aware, right? Only the mind, if it thinks it's supposed to attain this consciousness, will it apply efforts. But we have to get that mind out of the way and recognize that you don't have to do anything to know that you are. You are effortlessly, helplessly, you are. That is knowledge in that sense. Before,
Yeah, it's paradoxical.
Before I thought, oh no, I have to find consciousness. I have to discover it. I have to feel it. I have to tune into it. I have to go into a samadhi and attain it. That's not knowledge. So in a sense, when we use the word knowledge in a Vedanta, we're aligning our minds to recognize what is. We're getting our minds out of the way. In that sense, we use the word knowledge. Simply getting the mind out of the way. That means the mind, recognizes its own truth. Just like this, okay? The pot, okay, this is the mind. One day your mind, when you wake up, is like this. It's clear. It is, thoughtful, yeah? And the next day at evening time, the mind is tired and fatigued and it's feeling like dull. So whatever the state of the mind is, this is a samadhi mind, right? Very beautiful and clear and sublime. This is a state of your morning mind, which is a little bit bigger. And then your evening mind, which is teeny weeny, right? It can barely think sometimes. Now, when we say knowledge, Mike, we have to recognize that no matter what state of mind is present, there's always one content. And that content, in this case, the clay, is always known, never not available, never not present, as this self-revealing emness. But when this mind is beautiful and big, it is very different than this small mind. So one thing is here, one thing is not here, in reference to the shape of the mind, in reference to the clarity of the mind. But whether the mind's very clear or very dull, what's always true in every state of the mind? Self-revealing I am. That's knowledge.
That kind of sounds like what I was saying, though. That's the paradoxical thing about it, because it sounds like what you're saying is that, and I agree, whatever state the mind is, that is awareness. That is an activity, if you like, of awareness. Although, and yet and so in that case, if you're in samadhi and you say the mind is registering something, that is a paradoxical and inadequate way of putting it, because it's actually consciousness still being aware of itself.
Yeah, in other words, it's never not aware of itself, and it's not an activity, because activity is always a product of the mind. Right now, your mind and my mind are very much active. We're having this conversation, right? But whether we're having the most boring conversation or the most interesting conversation, we both know that there is awareness in this moment, right? And that awareness for both me and you is exactly the same. It needs no effort. I don't have to tell you, hey, Mike, be aware right now. And you don't have to tell me that. So there's one effortless, helpless factor in all time. It is the self-revealing amness. And in that, in this metaphorical sense, that would be the clay. But what's changing throughout that presence, that self-revealing to all of us, is the state of the mind and the conversations that are going on, including this conversation between this instrument and that instrument called Mike. So that means whatever we say, Mike, right now, what's still going to be true? Self-revealing.
So
I don't know how helpful this is going to be, but I think it's interesting anyway, because Mike's talking a little bit about the mind, like either being there or not being there, or, you know, like during samadhi. So anyway, in surfing, I've heard a lot of people relating, and I've had these experiences myself. When you put yourself in a really serious situation where you could die from a wave, and usually includes being in a barrel, like in a tube, two very opposite things can happen. One is your perception becomes super crystal clear, like a 4-second barrel, which is very long for the wave to hold that shape, feels like an eternity. And you can see, like you can remember really clearly every detail, okay? Or you could be in the same situation, same kind of situation, and your mind is a blank after it. Like you remember catching the wave, you remember getting out of the wave at the end of it, but there's no visual memory of anything that happened in the wave. There might be a little bit of a sensorial memory of the power of being pushed, or the wave kind of sucking you up and you're having to adjust. But there's no real memory of it. And I've heard a lot of people talking about these two extremes. Yeah. And I felt these two extremes myself. Not that I surf, you know, serious wave, but serious enough to feel that. You know, I just find that's really interesting, because it relates to, okay, the awareness was there because I knew I was in that situation, even though I don't remember it. And I also know I was in this situation that I remember so clearly. So the awareness, the constant is there, but the mind, in a way, it doesn't matter. Like it's two opposite things that can happen.
Okay. So in other words, in the presence of that one constant awareness, the two opposites are possible. The two opposites recognized distinctly, they are. So there has to be a third variable. That's why I call it turiya, other than those other states, which is at the level of the mind.
I think I can relate to that. The focus is what you're talking about. So you realize how dangerous it is in the moment, and that focus makes you forget the time. Time becomes irrelevant in that moment. I feel the same way on the motorbike when I'm riding, especially through trees, and you know, your focus is so clear, and that becomes actually the thing that becomes addictive. When you're riding, you're experiencing a state of complete clarity and the detail to knowing that you have to make the right decisions. So that clarity is, I'm imagining it would be the same as surfing. You realize the danger, you have to keep consistent clarity and focus, and that itself is freeing in a way, because you don't think about anything else.
Yeah, and I guess that's what compelled me to bring up this narrative of this story, is because we are talking about focus. I mean, samadhi to me, before I started these classes, I had nothing to do with spiritual world, or I'd never done anything else. I'd inquired a little bit in Buddhism, and I rejected everything until I came to this. But so my point is, so samadhi to me, from what I'm hearing here, is about focus. So yes, exactly, Loren is right. It's the hyper focus, and my point here is that focus can have, in this case, two completely opposite outcomes.
You know, you will be very surprised how incredibly focused our minds can get. And relating back, I'll amplify this a little bit further. In Amazon, when we had that, you know, substance, the mind gets so focused, it's able to hear birds from a kilometer away. It's able to pick up insects like creepy crawlies on the ground. You would never, impossible, you can't hear it right now. So our capacity of the mind is so huge, but for the sake of transactional reasons, Ishwara has to make it what I call the baseline for the sake of, right, working. So that's why some people get addicted to substances, because they just love that sharpened state of creativity and that like upliftment and like, wow, this is like buzzing, like vibrating. Yeah. So there's always that danger of what we call stuck in sattva, stuck in a mind that's incredibly sharp and buzzing. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, so it's possible. So all of these states are in the presence of that one non-negatable substratum. Yeah, so initially we had to use this mind to discern the subject and the object. But then even that discernment becomes redundant, because what you discern is only one reality here. So discernment, this from that, is no longer relevant. Yes, there is, when you say mind, to bring this more visual, there is a, what we call, you know, relatively, there is a mind, right, that thinks, you know, and able to, right, come up with things. But wherever there is mind, that's exactly where consciousness is. So don't think that consciousness, that I have to now escape the mind. I have to, this is called Nirvikalpa Samadhi in yoga. I have to escape the mind to reach consciousness. There is no escaping anything. Oneness means oneness. It will never be two-ness. So you cannot have consciousness plus mind. Wherever there is thought, wherever there is a state, wherever there is a samadhi, wherever there is a waking state, wherever there is a dream state, or a sleep state, or a death state, or an alignment state, or any state, that's exactly where the substratum is. You will never find it anywhere but here and now, which is known to you as helpless, self-revealing I am.
Yes, what I'm saying is, just addendum to this, that there is no escaping the instrument as well. Through the instrument only, we are able to find out that there is only one thing. But still, while we are finding out, there is no escaping the instrument also.
Exactly. So you use the instrument, you clean up the instrument only to discover I am not this instrument that's really now cleaned up. So you got scammed.
Andre, I would say that's what people fear the most, losing their individuality, their sense of individuality. It's very fearful for some people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they fear death, and then they think that's the end of their individuality. So that is always the biggest barrier, I think.
Wow.
And that's why they
right.
don't want to think about it.
And you experience this at work, I would suppose.
Absolutely. Fear of death is, Lord Yama is the biggest fear of all. Like, people fear that the most.
Wow.
Right to the end. What's going to happen to me?
Yeah.
And they can't get answers. They just cannot get answers through the physical world, through perception and inference or anything. So that's the biggest fear of all. And it's behind every single decision. It's always survival and fear of not existing.
Yeah. This is where,
but if I may say,
yes.
that is one thing which works most to get people into spirituality. If all of us, bunch of people, are sitting here, they have been the one who have been victim of this fear rather than the one who couldn't care less. So that fear is very important to get people into spirituality.
Yeah. Yeah.
I, for one, have come from
a catalyst. Yeah. Leo?
Yeah, well, I was going to say kind of the opposite of Gautam, even though I'm not, you know, yeah, he's right. But in the beginning of the class, we were talking about, I think you mentioned something about people having a resistance towards Vedanta.
Yeah.
And what I find is often what Lorena said, that, you know, Vedanta involves giving up your individuality. And when I'm talking to people about it, and that gist comes through, straight away I feel like a fear, like they're too attached to their desires, to their senses, emotions. They don't want to give that up. You know, if the end result of his Vedanta is giving that up, ultimately, you know, I'm being very crude, but yeah, that really creates a resistance. They don't want anything to do with it.
So then I guess it's really useful to point out that you're not really giving anything up. You're just discovering that you're much bigger than what you thought you were. Yeah, so we need to restructure it, reset it in a different way. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.